G.K. Chesterton said, "The unconscious democracy of America is a very fine thing. It is a true and deep and instinctive assumption of the equality of citizens, which even voting and elections have not destroyed." We'll learn more about G.K. Chesterton's wit and wisdom tonight, so please stay with us. Thank you very much and welcome. I'm Father Mitch and welcome to EWTN Live, our chance to bring you guests from all over the world. But before we get to our guest, I want to mention that today is the feast of St. Anthony Mary Claret. He was the founder of the Claretians, and he came as a missionary to Cuba. He came from Spain and in the 1800s. And eventually became a bishop and was really great at bringing in spirituality along with the facts of the faith and giving people good catechism and preparation of the clergy. So he was canonized by Pope Pius XII, and we pray that the Lord would bless the Claretian fathers with many, many more vocations. Now, our guest tonight has brought G.K. Chesterton once again to a revered and recognized place among 20th century literary figures. He is the creator and host of the EWTN series, G.K. Chesterton, the Apostle of Common Sense. He's also the president of the American Chesterton Society, and he is the publisher of Gilbert Magazine. He has written 3 books on Chesterton, including a new one, The Complete Thinker, which was just released. So please welcome a good friend of the networks and of mine, Dale Ahlquist. Dale, welcome. Good to have you here.
All right.
Well, how are things going with taping this week?
We're taping a new season of shows on Chesterton for the Apostle of Common Sense. Today we tied my son to a tree up at the shrine and stabbed him with a pitchfork.
Now, was that your older son or your younger son?
It was my older son, and we didn't have time to do my younger son.
Well, you know, he hasn't lived long enough to really do that to him. Give him a chance and then do it.
Well, we had a great time. We also started to build the Tower of Babel up there too. So there's lots of
now,
things.
which son did that?
Everybody was working on that. We also even brought in a deacon to help us build the Tower of Babel.
Right.
So that's something that people can look forward to in the next season.
Oh, that'll be good. That'll be good. Well, good to have you back.
Thank you.
You know, it's not only that the person you talk about so much, G.K. Chesterton, was so creative and so witty and uses our English language so wonderfully well. But, you know, you do some pretty creative things, like stabbing your son with a pitchfork and things like that.
Well, it's true that our show is not like any other show on this network or on any other network.
Yes.
And we have the great privilege of doing all kinds of different things because Chesterton wrote about everything. So we cover every topic, and he used all different art forms and all different literary genres, and we get to explore all of that.
Yeah. He wasn't, just writing theology books. Give us some sense of the breadth of his literary output.
Well, you have to start by understanding he wrote 100 books, and he wrote introductions to 200 more books. He wrote hundreds and hundreds of poems. He wrote detective stories and novels, plays, but he was primarily a journalist and he was primarily an essayist, and he wrote thousands and thousands of essays, at least 5,000 literary essays. We're still finding them, we're still collecting them.
Is that right?
Yeah, there's not a place in the world that holds all of his writings. We are still gathering them and trying to get them into my computer.
I hope you do backup.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I have to go right now and do that.
Just settle
All right,
down.
okay.
We'll get, because that older son of you that you stabbed has work to do tomorrow, we'll get him to do it.
All right.
Now, in this new book, you call it Chesterton, the Complete Thinker.
The Complete Thinker, the Marvelous Mind of G.K. Chesterton is the subtitle. And we were trying to do something to show that what's wrong with the world today is not only incomplete thinking, but narrow thinking. We tend towards specialization right away. We start directing our children in school. If they show an inclination towards the maths or the sciences, they are just pushed into that direction. They do not teach the humanities to those kids or the arts. Likewise with the kids who are showing any artistic inclinations, they don't get a complete education anymore. And so the book kind of epitomizes the kind of thinker we're trying to create, because Chesterton not only wrote about everything, but he puts it all together. And we have this great problem that because we think in fragments, we're starting to talk in fragments. And people do not speak in complete sentences anymore. They're trying to say more and more with fewer and fewer words.
Yeah, I was, with some friends. One of my closest friends had his birthday, so we're having dinner together, and the three of us there. And, I couldn't help overhear a relatively loud young man, fairly unkempt, who was saying, like, I was like, wow. And
that was the extent of his vocabulary. That was, those are all the words he knew right there.
And like and awesome and a couple other words, were it. And then there are many, many people, including in the media, who use vulgarities as punctuation. They don't seem to know a wide range of words to express what they think and or feel, but they just use vulgarities as punctuation, and it's pretty bland. And
plus, we're using the vulgarities for the verbs and the nouns and the adjectives.
That's right.
Yeah.
Save money that way.
Yeah, it is. And of course, it epitomizes the problem that we can't think because we can't talk.
Yes.
And we can't teach as a result either.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons why we started Chesterton Academy, the new high school that we founded up in Minneapolis, that you happen to be on the board of advisors for.
Yes, I am. Yes,
and we're privileged to have you do that. And the school is just starting its 5th year, and we were just named as one of the top 50 Catholic high schools in the country.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
But your success, you named it after Chesterton, but you're inspired by his breadth of vision.
Yeah, absolutely, because Chesterton not only represents what a good thinker looks like,
you don't mean exteriorly, because he'd be a little big for some of your students.
He's fun to look at because he's so big, Chesterton, the politest man in all of England, who could stand up on a bus and offer his seat to 3 women at one time. I was using the term metaphorically, Father, that he's what a complete thinker looks like in terms of a model thinker. And that's what a normal thinker is supposed to look like, who can see the connection between the arts and the sciences, who can see the connection between math and logic and philosophy, and how every one of these subjects is tied to one subject.
Which is?
It happens to be the incarnation. The fact that God became flesh informs everything else, and everything is relevant to that truth. And that truth then is sort of the trunk of the tree, and every other branch of knowledge comes from that truth.
And it's something that is a scandal to people on opposite ends of the spectrum of thought. I mean, you have some Christians who think that the incarnation is just not spiritual enough, and others who think that the incarnation is not materialistic enough. You know, the atheists and such. And Chesterton loved to make sure that the extremes were well-founded in their offense by knowing the truth set before them.
Yeah, he has that wonderful image in Orthodoxy about the wild truth, reeling but erect. Because throughout history, the church has been tempted towards one heresy on the one side and one heresy on the other. And every heresy is an attack somehow on the incarnation, making God too much of a human as Christ, or too much of a spirit as Christ. Neither getting it, that idea that fully God and fully man, the great paradox of the God-man.
Yes.
Yes, that is the truth that informs everything. God became flesh, and that's why our art has to be beautiful. That's why our philosophy has to make sense. That's why we try to measure God's created world with the sciences. And that's why we have to promote economic and social justice as well. Mm-hmm. All those things are tied together.
Yep.
And what we've done is we separated them all from each other. Chesterton says the world has become one wild divorce court.
What does he mean by that?
Because we've separated every topic and every discipline from each other, which is why we're not allowed to bring religion into politics, which is why we're not allowed to bring religion into economics.
Also, it makes a lot of the politicians very uncomfortable.
It does.
Especially when you get to some of the thou shalt nots.
Yeah, that is uncomfortable. And Chesterton has some remarkable things to say about America, which I bring out in my book, because he says it's the only nation that's ever been founded on a creed. We established our creed in our founding documents. We say, this is what we believe. We believe that we have these inalienable rights that were given to us by God.
Yep.
And so our rights are divine rights. And Chesterton says we can always promote human rights better if we regard them as divine rights.
See, and this is very much one of the issues at stake in our culture, because in the same Declaration of Independence, in the last paragraph, it also says we will be judged by the Creator for what we've done. And so that they saw themselves as having these rights, but also the responsibilities for which they are responsible to God who gave them the rights.
Yeah, Chesterton always emphasizes the connection between freedom and responsibility. When he talks about the great rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, liberty is always misunderstood as being able to do whatever you want, but no, it means obeying the rules, but you have freedom within the rules, and there's this framework that within which we are very free, but we are responsible. That means we have to act responsibly. And he points out that the pursuit of happiness is not the pursuit of pleasure. Happiness is an end. Pleasure is not an end. And then, of course, the great right that is most neglected and abused, the right to life. And Chesterton was absolutely prophetic about that. He says the only object of liberty is life.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an important fact of the 20th century. He didn't live to see the worst of the horrors of the 20th century. He died in 1936. 36. So it was the Third Reich was established. Stalin was in place. Mao Zedong was not, but the Empire of Japan was also on the move. And those horrors of people who said that we have to get rid of the limits of morals and have freedom to do what we want, and then become absolutely totalitarian murderers on a scale never seen in the history of the world.
And yet, you say Chesterton did live to see it, but he absolutely saw it coming.
Yes.
He predicted
he did.
that it would come because he saw the direction the world was going. And he said, if you take away the God, the government will become the God.
Yep.
And that's what happened in the 20th century. He also predicted the sexual revolution. He said in 1926, he said the next great heresy will be an attack on morality, especially on sexual morality. And he says the madness of tomorrow is not in Moscow, it's much more in Manhattan. And he saw the attack on marriage and on the family. He was speaking out against contraception long before anyone else was on a public basis and said contraception would lead to abortion, it would lead to infanticide and euthanasia.
Yep.
And he said this, that we would lose our respect for life itself.
As a matter of fact, for all the talk and rhetoric that you hear, well, if we just have more contraception available, we won't need to have so many abortions. Whereas you look at the graph of the use of the contraceptive pill in 1970 when it becomes available, that graph of its use has exactly the same curve as the increase of abortion and divorce.
Yeah.
And then in the year after Roe versus Wade, the murder rate for children 5 and under increased by 100% in 1 year. He was absolutely right.
Yeah, and he said that the moment that sex ceases to be a servant, it becomes a tyrant. And that's epitomizes the problem that we're experiencing in our society today. Sex has become a tyrant because it has ceased to be a servant.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you dare to disagree with the change in sexual mores that the modern world pushes, then the anger and rejection becomes extremely strong. So that the tyranny of those who want sexual libertinism to take away the freedom of virtue is very rampant today.
He also makes the connection that this rise of the worship of sex is connected to a rise in the worship of nature. And he sees this skewed devotion to nature as our mother, as opposed to nature as our sister, which he says, nature. Our proper attitude towards nature is that she's our sister because we both have the same father, and so we take care of our sister, we respect her, but she has no authority over us. But he said that in the modern, kind of return to paganism, an attempt to return to paganism, the rejection of the Christian God, there'd be this kind of nature worship, and he said there's also be this new reverence for animals, and he said wherever you have animal worship, you will have human sacrifice.
And
that explains why we have
case.
these giant pet stores and we don't have any more baby stores anymore.
Or also that the divergence between the right to life for an infant in the womb is not protected by law,
right,
while the right to life for an unborn eagle is extremely, and you go to jail if you break an eagle egg or kill an eagle. And again, I'm not in favor of killing eagles by any means, but there is a great disproportion between what happens with the animals and what the care for human beings.
Well, you used the word proportion. Chesterton talks about proportion being the essence of beauty. And that's what we've lost. Everything is disproportionate in the modern world. Yes. And part of being a complete thinker is putting everything in its right place and in its right proportion, its right balance. Yeah. And that's what Chesterton is the master of. And that's why it's such a pleasure to read him and to see how he has his finger on the pulse of what's going on right now. It's truly a divine prophetic insight that he has.
One way in which I recommend people get a sense of that proportion and beauty is to go to your local art museum and go first, make a beeline to the modern art section and take a look at the use of color, especially of human figures, and look at the sense of proportion in human figures. And then once you get to the point of no longer being able to stand it, then go look at the medieval section. Go look at the classical Greek section, or they have a Roman section. You know, to take a look at that sense of beauty in contrast to what the modern, and the modern art is all about making sure I express myself. My self-expression is what this is all about. And if you don't like it, you don't understand the modern world.
Yeah, and Chesterton actually got his start. His very first published article was an art review. So he started out as an art critic. And he saw this exact same thing starting in 1899, 1900. And he saw that it was starting to fall apart with the Impressionists.
Yep.
All of a sudden, everything is becoming fuzzy. And the very term impressionism means it's my impression. It's totally subjective. And it already starts to be a disconnect with an audience, and it starts to become an interior product. And
though in contrast to the later 20th century art, the Impressionists are a welcome relief.
Oh, absolutely. That's what's so ironic. People say, well, yeah, but I like the Impressionists. Well, that's because you're comparing them with what came after them. Look at art right before the Impressionists, though. It was really the high point of Western art in terms of classical realism. The Bouguereau, the Lord Leighton, the absolute astonishing things that were done with a paintbrush. And that's what's forgotten about. And we like the Impressionists because they're so much better than what came after it. But Chesterton saw it coming. He says Impressionism means there's no floor in the universe. It'll start just falling apart. The standards will disappear. The loss of beauty will follow.
And again, you can think of it as having a binoculars or a telescope, that when you get to the Impressionists, you're getting the fuzziness, and then when you get to the modern, the late modern, then you see the distortion.
Yeah.
You know, whereas you have to go to see clearly in the Renaissance, and you know, sometimes Baroque is overdone, but you know, you see at least a sense of, you know, what seeking beauty.
And of course, part of it is the separation of art from religion, which Chesterton always pointed out that, you know, it was the church that was responsible for some of the greatest art in all of history, and it started within the churches themselves. The churches produced the beautiful art, the physical churches themselves.
Right.
And they were the source of beauty and inspiration and storytelling and everything else.
Yeah, I rarely have seen tour groups to Europe going from train station to factory. When they go to Rome, they go from church to church.
Yeah, I wonder why that is.
Yeah, because it's beautiful, you know. Yeah. And same thing with the rest of Europe. You know, that this is where you find beauty and harmony.
Well, Chesterton is, you know, he not only defends the Catholic faith, he's defending Western civilization, which is under attack from every direction. The art is under attack, the idea of justice is under attack, but certainly the basis of civilization itself is under attack, and that's the family. And Chesterton sees that if we don't preserve the family, the entire society will fall apart. Another absolutely prophetic insight of his. He started by defending marriage against easy divorce. And he said that if we don't honor the vow, you know, there's nothing to hold marriage together after that, and then nothing to hold the family together.
Right.
And you know, that's why we're fighting these bizarre battles right now, because we lost the respect for marriage a generation ago.
Well, yes, 1965 marks the turning point in this country when no-fault divorce. Again, you don't want to blame anybody. You don't want anybody to feel bad for the various things that they did wrong. And so no-fault divorce. And from that point on, we see the increase of single mothers and children living in greater and greater poverty. And it's gotten to the point already, just 50 years, now that 40% of our children are born to unwed mothers nationwide. And this is an amazing change compared to 2% in 1940.
And Chesterton warned, he said the result of frivolous divorce will be frivolous marriage. And now we have just absolutely frivolous marriage. In fact, the most frivolous type of marriage imaginable is being proposed.
Yes.
It's not even marriage.
Right.
And that's the battle we're fighting now. And Chesterton was even amazingly prophetic about what would have been really unmentionable in his time, the idea of a same-sex union. But he said something about it, a couple little giveaway lines that indicated that he could see that undercurrent coming. And for instance, he said Noah took 2 of every animal on the ark with him, but he didn't take 2 Noahs.
Yes.
But he also had a great line, which is a reference. He says, "The lily is beautiful," and the lily was sort of the symbol of the Oscar Wilde decadent movement. The lily, they always held a lily. He says, "The lily is beautiful, but the purpose of the lily is not to be beautiful. The purpose of the lily is to make more lilies."
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a way of subtly explaining a truth when you can't speak about unmentionable things openly.
And I'll never forget being in an airport coming back from giving a retreat. I was in the Miami airport transitioning, and I overheard the young adults that were in their 20s behind me say, "Well, I'm going to move to Las Vegas and have a lot of fun out there with the new job I've got, and maybe have a starter marriage." So that, and I asked around, and that has become a fairly commonplace phrase, that I'll have a starter marriage, and then later on I'll settle down to a more serious marriage.
Well, I've been working on my starter marriage for 31 years.
That's a good start. But as we say in Polish, may you live 100 years.
Yeah, well, I'll have to talk to my wife about that. I don't know if she wants me to live that long. And of course, you know that I've been married to Chesterton as long as I've been married to my wife, because I started reading Chesterton on my honeymoon.
Is that right?
Yeah, because that's when most people start reading Chesterton. Yeah.
Actually, I've never been on a honeymoon, and I started reading Chesterton.
Well, you would be what they call the exception that proves the rule, Father.
But over and over again, the value of reading this man of the early 20th century is that he keeps on seeing the roots that will develop into the foul weeds of the late 20th and early 21st centuries.
And the thing about a prophet is this: people forget that a prophet wants to be wrong. A prophet is not saying that this is inevitable and this will happen. It's only saying, prophet is only saying, this is the road you're on, and you need to turn around and repent and get off that road. But I can tell you where that road's going to lead. It's going to lead here. And Chesterton sees exactly where the road was going, and he paints a very clear picture of what it looks like. But the prophet's always saying, like Isaiah, seek the Lord while he may be found, and call upon him while he's near, and let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thought, and return unto the Lord, and he will have mercy and abundantly pardon.
And what is also a key characteristic of that prophetic gift of someone like Chesterton is that he didn't do it through third sight, through necromancy, through nonsense. He used thought. He was able to see logical steps that have necessary conclusions, and you're just going down that path, and you will see the disaster, because there's no other way down that path.
The other thing, Chesterton is not only defending the faith, he's also defending reason, because reason itself is under attack.
Yep.
And he says the Catholic Church, he says, is the only institution today defending reason.
Yep.
And of course, he said it then, but it's still true now.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, we've got to take a break before we go to questions and comments. I just want to mention to you, the American Chesterton Society can be reached at their website, www.chesterton.org. And we'll be back in just a couple minutes, because we want to get your questions and comments, as well as those of our studio audience. So please stay with us. Thank you. Welcome back. First, I want to mention that there are a number of books and videos on G.K. Chesterton that are available at EWTN's Religious Catalog. And you can call them at 1-800-854-6316. Or you can also go to the website EWTNreligiouscatalog.com, and you can see what's available and on tape and books and all that, and including Dale's books. We'd be glad to have that there. Also, we want to mention that we have a wonderful audience here from different parts of the country, one large group from outside the country in the Dominion of Canada. Good to have all of you here. And also we have one father. I want to mention Father Sebastian. He's one of the original members of Mother Teresa's order for men. And so it's good to have you here. He's giving a retreat here in town. And we'd love to have you come here on pilgrimage as well. You can contact our pilgrimage department by calling them at 205-271-2966. All right? Or you can go to the website, www.ewtn.com, and they will help you with scheduling of masses and shows, tours of the studios, information on how to get up to Hansville to see the sisters, and places you can stay and eat right here in beautiful Irondale, Alabama. Are you ready for some questions?
I am indeed.
All right, let's start off with the call. We have Larry on the line. Hello, Larry.
Hi, Father. Hi, Mr. Ahlquist.
Where are you from, Larry?
I'm from Wyoming, Pennsylvania, in the northeastern Pennsylvania, Scranton Diocese.
All right, good to have you. And what's your question?
I'd like to ask, because I know that Chesterton was an art school dropout and never officially studied theology, philosophy, or journalism, I've always been curious how he ended up becoming one of the 20th century's most prominent representatives of them.
Because,
how did he get so smart?
Because he didn't go to the university. Yeah, let that be a lesson. He obviously had a great mind, a gifted mind. He read an awful lot, and he had a great way of digesting books that once he read them, they were there forever. So there was a Mozartian mind to him that he had just so much knowledge at his disposal, and it was without the benefit of a formal education. So.
Now, just to clarify for our audience, in his day, the Chesterton Academy wasn't established yet, was it?
That's a true statement, Father.
And
yes.
he might have gone to that and done fine.
I'm thinking that if he'd gone to Chesterton Academy, he would have been exactly as great as he was.
All right, let's start off with a question here. Sir, where are you from?
From Toronto, Ontario.
Good to have you.
The Canadians who are just wondering, Father Ian Boyd in the Chesterton Society of Canada, they put out the Chesterton Review. Just wondering if there's any communication or collaboration between the two groups.
Yes, if you had not told me you were from Canada, I would have suspected you were from Canada.
I got the accent.
But no, it's because of the question, not the accent. Father Boyd was established up at Saskatoon for many years, where he created the Chesterton Review, and I was an early reader of it. And he and I have known each other for a very long time, and I'm privileged to work with him on a lot of operations. So.
And does your Chesterton Society do cooperative work back and forth?
We're totally independent of one another.
Yes.
The Chesterton Society with our
get
magazine.
Along?
Absolutely. What's interesting is that he kind of goes towards. He has a more scholarly appeal with the Chesterton Review. Is a much more scholarly journal and appeals and doing great work there. And he has international conferences that he does all around the world. Because, like I said, they're international conferences. I don't know if you knew that's what it meant, but we just focus on different aspects of Chesterton and complement each other, I think, very nicely.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
that's good. We have another call. Hello, Stephen. Stephen,
Yes.
are you there?
Yes, thank you for taking my call.
Sure. Where are you from?
Binghamton, New York, only a few miles north of the previous caller, and I'm in the Syracuse diocese.
Great. Good to have you. And what's your question?
Are there any known voice recordings of G.K. Chesterton?
Yes, there are. There are at least three, well, when I say at least three, there's only three known recordings of his voice, 2 BBC radio broadcasts that were preserved, and 1 after-dinner speech. And then there is one little small newsreel clip where he's speaking when he came to the United States at Worcester, Massachusetts at the Holy Cross College. So you can get a DVD, or rather a CD of the 3 recordings from our website at chesterton.org.
Is that, so you make that CD available?
Yeah, of the only known recordings of his voice. Yeah.
Now I understand that his voice. One of the comments, I'd never heard these things, but one of the comments I heard is that how did such a large man have such a small voice?
And he was always, people talked about his voice being very high, but then you hear it on the recordings and it's not very high. It's just a normal voice, but since it came out of such a large man, it sounded high.
I see.
Yeah.
Not. Wait a minute.
Well, we have the recordings of his voice, and they're not high, so that's
okay.
Yeah, that's
all right.
That's the Dale Ahlquist explanation of that.
All right. Well, check that out. Ma'am, where are you from?
I'm from Port Colborne in Ontario,
Good
Canada.
to have you here. Welcome. And what is your question?
I was just wondering how your wife enjoyed Chesterton on your honeymoon.
Well, it's a good story. In fact, I remember I first told the story to Mother Angelica when she interviewed me on this very stage, and we had the funny story that I read The Everlasting Man and my wife read Les Miserables. So Mother did a good job of embarrassing me.
But does your wife read much Chesterton
Well,
now?
yes, and as she always says, the 3 of us get along very well. But she is my chief critic, so everything I write has to be filtered through her, and that's where she gets it. Yeah.
Now, and just so folks know, Chesterton himself was married and
Yes.
had a very charming wife.
Yes, and was totally dependent on her, and they had such a beautiful marriage because he could not have been the writer he was without her total support and devotion and simply taking care of him because he was such a completely helpless and absent-minded man. Yeah. But he says to be absent-minded means to be present-minded about something else.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. All right, let's take another caller. We have Dixie on the line. Hello, Dixie.
Hi,
Hi, where are you from?
I'm from Mississippi.
Well, now that is a name I would expect from Mississippi.
It's not my fault. My daddy named me.
That's not, I don't even take it as a fault. Now, what is your
Thank you.
question?
My question for Mr. Ahlquist is, I thought I heard that Mr. Chesterton had some last words on his deathbed, and I just never could find out exactly the story behind that.
Yes, his last words, the last real thought that came from his great mind that was recorded by his biographer Macy Ward is that he kind of just sat up or looked up and said, "It's all very clear. It's between light and darkness, and everyone must choose." It's absolutely profound thought.
Yeah, good way to,
Yeah.
move on out,
Yeah.
and then go to your maker.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of really dumber things I have heard from the dying than that. Sir, where are you from?
Part-time Texas, part-time Florida.
Good for you. So sometimes you want a little bit of wet, sometimes a little dry.
That'll do it.
And what's your question?
I was asking Dale if he'd be willing to tell us a book that he would recommend as sort of the best, perhaps overall introduction to Chesterton, and perhaps the best CD or DVD as well.
Well, Father Pacwa said I couldn't recommend a book that was not by Chesterton. But in spite of him saying that, the best introductory book to Chesterton is the one that I wrote on Chesterton.
I knew it was going there.
And I only say that because I used to be asked that question all the time, and I never had a good answer because I was never content with the answer that I gave. Because anytime I said something, I would always say, well, that's a good book to read, but it's better to read this one before that one. So before you read the first Chesterton book, read this one before that. But my introductory book is called The Apostle of Common Sense. And it was based on our first season of shows here, and it was just designed to introduce people to Chesterton. It's an overview of his most important books, plenty of good quotations from Chesterton, and that's what kind of brings people in. And then, in case you can't find that one, the Common Sense 101 Lessons from G.K. Chesterton by a writer named Ahlquist. But then after you start, those are the primer books. But then you have to read Orthodoxy. And then after that, you have to read Orthodoxy. And the key then is for the third book you should read is Orthodoxy. But don't read it unless you've read it twice before that.
And then after Orthodoxy, a lot of people have read, I know I went over to Everlasting Man because I couldn't find heresy.
Heretics.
Heretics.
Yeah.
I had to look around. Eventually found one at a used bookstore.
Yeah.
And
Heretics is back in print now. That's the great thing. When I started reading Chesterton, you had to comb through the used bookstores to find him. Now all of the stuff's in print, and that's one of the great signs of the Chesterton revival is that his books are available again.
Well, one of my professors had told me that one of the V2 bombs had hit the printing house where all the plates were for printing his books, and they got destroyed in World War II.
Yeah, well, several things got destroyed because Sheed and Ward Publishing in London was destroyed by the bombs, but they also had created a new publishing house in America. But it's all available now.
Now it's all available.
Yeah.
And Ignatius Press
Yes.
has come out with a lot of them. They also publish your books.
Right, and they publish that Pope guy's books too. Yeah. They publish his books. But they're working on the collected works. They've got 28 volumes of the collected works are now available, and that's out of a projected 60 volumes and they're all this thick. So get started.
All right, we have another call on the line. Hello, Sister Gina.
Yes, Father. Mitch.
Hi, where are you from?
I'm from Southington, Connecticut.
Great, welcome.
Thank you. And my question is either for you or for Dale Ahlquist. I was wondering if there is a movement that G.K. Chesterton lived a life of holiness and, is going to be proclaimed venerable or blessed or whatever, canonization. That's my question.
Thank you, sister. Appreciate you calling in.
Thanks for that question. We are absolutely working on getting Chesterton
a cause.
A cause, yes. And it's not. It hasn't officially been introduced, but there is a lot of work being done. And I can tell you, there is a groundswell of devotion to Chesterton. There's a universal cult that's forming around him, because he demonstrates his heroic virtue in his writing, but also in all the evidence from his life. He was a good man who was very connected to God, and all of the personal accounts indicate that. And we do have an episode in our sixth season exploring the idea of Chesterton being a saint and some of the personal testimony, and that's what an episode worth seeing from the sixth season. And my argument is real plain. We need more 300-pound cigar smoking saints.
You want to give a little competition to St. Thomas Aquinas, who was a pickled herring eating big saint. And that was his favorite.
Yes.
Pickled herring.
Yeah.
And there's just too much fat in the herring. So he just looked rotund.
But yeah, the Bishop of Northampton, England, is definitely starting to open his mind towards this, and he and I have been in contact. There's some people in England that have been in contact with him, but there are other bishops around the world who would like to see this go forward as well.
And why would it have to be the bishop?
Oh, he's the most natural one because that's where Chesterton's diocese was. That's where he's buried. But there's even though there's local devotion to him, he's really a universal figure. Newman really never had a local cult in England. He always had a universal cult.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right, take another question from our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
I'm from Iowa.
Good to have you here. Welcome.
And I'm here with the Lay Missionaries of Charity to be with Father Sebastian and hope to bring them to Iowa. We'll see. Yeah.
And your question?
And my question is, you mentioned everlasting man, both of you. And when I read that, I thought, oh my gosh, I wish this guy were here today, because his arguments against the sort of atheist Darwinists that are out all over arguing today, and also even the radical anti-humanist environmental fringe, are so pertinent. And I wondered, is anyone using his arguments to argue with those people?
Well, yes, that's exactly what we're doing. And when you say you wish he was here, the great thing is he is here. We obviously believe, there's a lot of us who believe he should be counted among the saints, but the fact is we have his writings. His writings are here. Just like we have Thomas Aquinas' writings. They are pertinent and absolutely applicable today. The Everlasting Man, a great book, but that really just scratches the surface of his great arguments against the Darwinian mentality. And that's, the thing about Darwinism is it's a bad philosophy. Whatever merits it may have in the scientific world, and even those are debatable because it's been revised so many times,
Sure.
But Darwinism as a philosophy, Chesterton absolutely picks apart, because that's what's taken over. It's this whole idea of endless progress, endless improvement. Things will always get better, and we will keep waiting for this better form of humanity to inevitably come. It's an attack on free will, it's an attack on morality, and it's an attack on tradition.
One of the guests I had on here, Ben Weicker, wrote a wonderful book called The Darwin Myth, and he brings out one of the extremely important points that Chesterton did, that it's in not so much an origin of the species, but in his second book that Darwin writes in the Descent of Man,
yeah.
that certain races are not really human. And so he said that blacks are a race in between the ape and the human being. And we need to breed them out of the population like you would breed inferior cattle out from a herd. I mean, what a horrific mentality. Well, and that this idea was used in the racism of later periods
to
justify racist weeding out and mass murder.
Well, then it led to the eugenics movement, which was started by Sir Francis Galton, Charles Darwin's cousin.
Yes.
And eugenics was embraced by all the leading intellectuals in Europe, especially in England in the early 20th century. And of course, Margaret Sanger embraced eugenics.
Who founded Planned Parenthood. Which still, as much as they don't like to admit this, they still do have 60% of their abortion clinics in African American neighborhoods, even though African Americans are only 12% of the population.
Well, that's where she wanted the birth control clinics in all the neighborhoods of the types that she did not want reproducing.
Yes.
Yeah. And there was a direct connection between the eugenicist movement in America and the one in Nazi Germany.
Oh, they met in 1935 to collaborate.
But Chesterton was the only leading intellectual who wrote an entire book against eugenics.
This is one of the reasons why I'm solidly against the federal government giving Planned Parenthood money. They give them $300 million. And what are they doing with it? I don't trust them. But let's go over now to Karen. Hello, Karen.
Good evening, Father, and good evening, Dale. This is Karen from El Paso, Illinois. In Life is Worth Living, our soon-to-be saint, Archbishop Fulton Sheen, mentioned Chesterton, as well as in his Treasure and Clay autobiography, as one of his favorite authors. Had they ever met? Thank you.
Yes. Chesterton wrote the introduction to Fulton Sheen's first book. Sheen had just graduated from Louvain. He finished his dissertation, and he wanted to have his dissertation published as a book. It was called God and Intelligence. So he was living in England. He went to G.K. Chesterton, asked him to write the introduction to the book. And Chesterton said to Fulton Sheen, I don't know anything about philosophy. And Sheen was stunned by the comment, and he said, "Are you kidding? Your book Orthodoxy is one of the greatest books of philosophy of the modern world, and there's so many of us who just depend on that book." And Chesterton very humbly said, "Well, I guess since we're both Catholic, we think the same way, so I can write the introduction to your book."
So he did.
Yeah, he did. And Sheen actually attended Chesterton's funeral as well. Yeah.
There you go. We have another question from our studio audience. Father, where are you from?
Father Brian Nolan, Mount St. Mary's University. I'm the campus chaplain.
Oh, great.
Good to have you here. And you're going to be on Life on the Rock this week.
I will be. Yes,
Great.
thank you.
What's your question?
The question I have is, can you speak of Chesterton's epic poem, The Ballad of the White Horse, and its relevancy for today?
Yes, The Ballad of the White Horse, truly one of the last great epic poems in the English language, something that every high school student should study. In fact, at Chesterton Academy, they do study it. But it is truly about the battle to save civilization. The attack on civilization, I was just saying earlier, there's the new barbarians that are attacking us. It's a historical event of King Alfred of Wessex, the only English king called the Great, King Alfred the Great, in the 9th century. He's attacked by the barbarians from the north, the Danes, but as you know, Chesterton groups them all together as the Vikings, and calls them huge, half-witted men. A reference to the football team from Minnesota,
Hey,
but anyways,
hey.
so I'm from there. I can say that, yeah. And he says they were as trees walking the earth, as witless and as tall. But they are attacking civilization. They're the barbarians. And Chesterton absolutely, in a beautiful poetic exploration of the difference of the two philosophies, and of course a great, stunning account of the battle itself. But then as far as the relevancy is Alfred's prophecy at the end of the book, where he sees a new form of barbarians attacking, and they won't come with weapons. They won't come with swords. Their weapons will be their pen and ink and dry ideas. Yeah.
Well, I've been talking a lot over the last few months about the new atheists in our culture, that movement, that's a movement of new atheists. I don't know who finances them, but I suspect that it's some billionaires that are doing this. And they are helping to create a new barbarianism. And it's really coming true, as he said. And what's amazing is that they look upon every moral degradation as a sign of their own victory.
Yeah, they do. And Chesterton actually talks a lot about that, because he says they always are well funded. There's very rich men who have probably gained their money immorally, and just to assuage their conscience, they're trying to destroy morality itself.
Yes.
And so they're attacking everything that's good, because that's their way out. That's their escape. They don't want to face God. Instead, they want to try to get their sins forgiven by claiming they're not sins.
Yes. And I always, I've started, I didn't always, but I started imagining that on the parapets of their castles, they'll have these large poles, and from them, instead of flying great banners of victory, it'll be Playboy magazines. That's about as much as they can muster in terms of morality.
Yeah, and it's amazing how Chesterton talks about these are the things that really make people uncomfortable to talk about. And Chesterton had a way of talking about them that is not uncomfortable. He had this great way of explaining the truth and explaining delicate and uncomfortable truths in a charming and loving and joyful way. And that's the gift that we have to get from him, so we can do the same thing ourselves.
I guess I have to keep reading more of him. I want to thank you very much for being with us, and I want to give you all a blessing. Almighty God bless you and keep you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Remember, we can bring you Dale Ahlquist and his series and all the other programs that we do, because you make this network possible. It is your gifts that keep us going. So we ask you, as Mother Angelica always did, please keep us in between your gas bill and your electric bill and your cable bill, and we'll be able to pay all of our bills too. Thank you.